nothing could ever that I get involved with now could ever seem as stressful or as miserable as special forces. So there's always that, no matter how bad things get or how high pressure they get. It's never as bad as being shot at or chased. There was one exercise on special forces selection where they took us to a blizzard in the middle of Scotland. We had to just go and live out in this blizzard for a few days. Within a day, there was nerve damage in your hands and your feet. It was too cold to sleep. It was just absolutely appalling. I think it took about a year and a half for some of the nerves in my hand to recover. The real secret to success is that when you're going through hell, you just keep going.
Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming James Walker onto the podcast. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have for quite some time. James is one of the most unique CEOs I've ever met. He's a nuclear physicist and a former Special Forces soldier for the United Kingdom, which we'll get into shortly. Today, James balances his time running two companies, one of which recently saw its market cap crest above $1 billion. Today, however, I'm going to discuss with James how he became a startup leader and now finds himself in the world of Fluorspar mining development. For those of you who've never heard of Fluorspar, you're not alone. Neither had I until I learned about James and his business venture. So why does Fluorspar even matter to folks like us? Well, despite being little known in the investing world, it is a widely used critical mineral. Fluorspar is used directly or indirectly to manufacture products such as aluminum, insulating foams, refrigerants, steel, consumer electronics, and lithium-ion batteries. Despite growing U.S. demand for Fluorspar, every ounce is currently imported from countries like China and Mexico. And that was the impetus for James, a former British Special Forces member, to get involved in the industry within America. So without further ado, James, welcome to the pod. It's great to have you. I want to talk about your experiences from Special Forces to Physicist and ultimately now to a CEO. Can you talk about some of the experiences that led you here and how they've enabled you to succeed?
So there's quite a number of jobs there that I just mentioned. I mean, obviously the Special Forces side of my past was very different from the Physicist side. The Special Forces role, I mean, you have to be very dedicated. You have to sacrifice a lot. You have to deal with a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of sleep deprivation, chaos. I mean, all of these things are very good practice, I think, for doing anything in life. And I think that's why you see a lot of sort of ex-military personnel being recruited into big organizations as well, because they do have that stressful experience and acting under pressure. It's obviously a very different skill set from the physicist side of things. You know, that is a very complicated, in-depth job where you're looking at very detail-orientated things where small differences make crucial differences to the overall outcome. I mean, I could argue that they're sort of complementary to each other. One that nothing could ever that I get involved with now could ever seem as stressful or as miserable as special forces. And so there's always that, no matter how bad things get or how high pressure they get. It's never as bad as being shot at or chased or, having...
What's one story that sticks out for you? Like, were you ever like freezing cold, like kind of in the ocean, or, I mean, being shot at is...
I mean, there's a load of them. I mean, you mentioned cold there, but there was one exercise on Special Forces selection where they took us to a blizzard in the middle of Scotland, and they basically we had to just go and live out in this blizzard for a few days. I would say within a day there was nerve damage in your hands and your feet. I made a mistake of my water all froze, so when I was thirsty I couldn't drink anything. It was too cold to sleep. I think that was one of the standout weekends away, which was just absolutely appalling. Yeah. And I think it took about a year and a half for some of the nerves in my hand to recover so I could feel them again. So that was one standout miserable weekend, for sure.
Yeah, I'll say, man. Well, thanks for your service. It's incredible. I could talk to you about those stories probably all day. Building a company from the ground up, the attention to detail, all these things. A lot of people have great ideas. They have a great product, a great technology, but they lose their way on the execution. They just sort of fail to deliver. So execution risk is huge for these smaller companies. Being in the Special Forces, being a physicist, how has that helped you to sort of mitigate that risk a bit?
I don't think that people who actually fail, it's their fault. It's actually very difficult to do anything that's worth achieving. So when you see a lot of these company owners and they're in industries that are very difficult to get off the ground, A lot of the reasons aren't usually their fault. It could be a bad market. It could be bad shareholder sentiment. It could just be areas where they're weak too. Like, if you're raising money, then your marketing needs to be decent. Your press releases need to be good. All of these different factors that feed into it. The real secret to success is that when you're going through hell, you just keep going. Because like all suffering ends, and like don't be intimidated by how hard something is. The worst thing, it's worse to fail and live with a regret than to just give up and think it's too difficult and I should go do something easier. The regret is something that never goes away, whereas your brain is wired to forget how much you suffered.
Yeah. Where the pain is short-lived.
Yeah, where the pain is short-lived. And like it will, like the nerve endings in my hands, they will come back.
Well said, man. Great advice. Now, you've found yourself in a very niche market, the market of Fluorspar. Now, this has become a focal point in your life as an entrepreneur. Can you tell us why? Most people have never heard of it. They don't even know how to pronounce it. They don't know what it is. Can you tell us kind of what's led you to want to focus on this obscure mineral?
Yeah, and look, you're 100% right. Most people have never heard of this mineral. And so even when I found this project, I myself was looking at what this thing is, right? What is fluorspar? And obviously once I did a bit of research, I saw that it was used in almost everything like steel, aluminum, hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, cement, glass, electronics, lithium ion batteries. Like the list goes on. Like it's one of the most widely used industrial minerals in the world. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I got interested in this was because in the United States, a big industrial country, there was no domestic supply of fluorspar. So I thought, interesting. So if I was to go in and build a fluorspar mine in the US, I would almost have not a monopoly on the whole area, on the industry, because obviously there are companies that import this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I would have a massive foothold and a major commercial advantage.
One of one.
Yeah, exactly. I would be one of one. And so when it came, and I saw big opportunities in the future when DoD would be looking in the future to source supply of materials, they would have to come to us because we're domestic. Same with DOE. And beyond that too, I saw that there would be a greater emphasis on domestic supply chains than international supply chains, especially following COVID, where the world became more bipolar in a way. And there was a separation of like the international trade, which had just increased and increased, was actually decreasing. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of reasons to get involved in this market, and not just because it was very unique and I could have a commanding position without much competition.
As I understand, the U.S. government has classified it as a critical mineral. In your view, why did they do that? What's the reasoning behind that?
So a critical mineral, they classify as anything that's vital to the economic security of the country. Mm-hmm. And so when they're looking at minerals, without fluorspar, you don't have a big domestic steel industry, or you can't manufacture things like hydrofluoric acid, fluorine that you need for your chemical industry. And the chemical industry, the steel industry, the metals industry in general, these are big industries, multi-billion-dollar industries that basically prop up a lot of the wider US industry. So the US industry becomes significantly weakened without these identified critical minerals. So I mean, right. I liked fluorspar because it was an industrial mineral that was widely used. The fact that it was critical meant that I knew in the future there would be government support for this as well.
So let's talk about how you're playing the space. You're the CEO of a company that's based in Utah. That's a development company that's hoping to mine fluorspar one day, Ares Strategic Mining. Now, which we're about to dive into. But before we go any further, it's important to mention that Ares Strategic Mining is a client and sponsor of Pinnacle Digest and this podcast. Can you give us a quick background on the Utah Fluorspar project? Just kind of like the elevator pitch, 30 to 60 seconds on why you think it's so prospective.
So what I would say now is that you can't really get a project that's much more de-risked than this because we've done a huge amount of work on it. So it's not an exploration project. We've bought an industrial estate, 50-acre industrial estate. We've bought 2 plants. One is delivered to site already. The foundations for that plant are built. The steel for it have been purchased and erected. The site has been zoned as industrial. We've got the whole site permitted, so it's a fully permitted mine. We have bought all the heavy industrial equipment, the dozers, the loaders, the excavators. We've even built all the underground ramp work. And it's been shotcreted and rock bolted, and it's had the ventilation system put in. We can't really get much closer to production than we are at now. Like we need to raise just a small amount more money, I think, just to install a secondary ventilation system just to meet MSHOR requirements. But after we've done that, we're into production.
It's fully permitted.
Fully permitted. Like, I think if we could just get that funding gap in place, the mining engineers who are currently on site estimate we could start pulling out ore to begin selling in about 6 weeks. So fast. We've really taken it right up until the point, as close as you can possibly get to production without producing.
Right. Now, America, seems to have been meeting its fluorspar demand. If this mine, the Lost Sheep mine, was to come into production, how would it help out, the domestic market?
So it's been meeting its demand by imports. And principally, the reason why there's no domestic market within the US is because they used to have a big fluorspar industry. And that industry got shipped overseas when China was industrializing. And it just flooded the market with cheap products, and it killed US industry, and essentially it got moved overseas. But even China now has moved from a net exporter to a net importer because it needs fluorspar so badly. And that's created a real squeeze on the international supply chain of fluorspar. So while the US is currently importing its product, the price of fluorspar has gone up quite steadily because of that increasing demand and fewer suppliers. So when we announced that we had this, there was enormous interest from industry in acquiring our fluorspar, buying it from us, where we could ship it to, all the different industries. So there's a number of big US institutions, materials brokers, big industries that are waiting for this because they want that secure domestic supply chain.
Are you able to compete with China on a cost basis?
Yeah, so the advantage here is that in the past, what China did when they were industrializing as a country is that they mined all of their high-grade fluorspar out. And that's what they flooded the market with cheaply that killed US industry, killed a lot of international industry. Mm-hmm. But that high grade was obviously all mined out. And so now they've drifted to a point where they are mining much lower grade deposits. Mm-hmm. And that has also led to them sourcing material themselves from abroad. So it's not even competing with China anymore. China has to compete with everybody else to buy in this stuff. Right. So whether that's Thailand or Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam, other big producing countries, China is now buying that product in. So they're not a producing competitor anymore.
Have you guys done any modeling, feasibility studies, any projections in terms of, free cash flow and things like that?
Certainly. So when we were developing it in those early stages of exploration, like when we're drilling and doing geophysics, LiDAR, all the normal things you go through, we discovered that the deposit type was very individual. So typically when you put together a resource estimate, you'll do a drill hole and another drill hole, and you'll interpolate between the two drill holes. Mm-hmm. Now, the deposit type we've got is very unique. It's a pipe system, so you can't interpolate. So when we took a lot of our data to an engineering firm and we said we want an independent resource put together, their advice was, you can't do a traditional resource 43-101 because it would take you 20 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to individually drill out each of these pipes. Mm. But the margin on each pipe is so good that you should just mine this thing like a quarry. Like prove up 1 to 2 years, mine those sites, and then move on to those secondary and tertiary pipes as you move along. Mm-hmm. And so they put together an economic analysis where they looked at how long the mine could operate for, the margins on it, the cost per ton to produce, what the market was currently paying for it, all these different factors. Yeah. And so they produced that kind of feasibility report for us. They put together very comprehensive financial models. And we still use those independent models when we talk to investors because even though it's 2021 and the price of fluorspar has gone up since 2021, mm-hmm. partially because of that squeeze on international supply.
Did it spit out some kind of internal rate of return or anything like that?
The big thing was that the margin on it was over 50%. So wow. For for dollar per ton of production, you were selling for double. And look, either way, whatever happens now, we're so close that it's going to happen. I mean, the sooner we raise the capital, the better. Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm not worried about it, but obviously I spend a lot of time just hunting down that capital, and that's a big part of my job. Yeah. But it's It's not something I'm worried about in the long term. The long term of the project is very secure. There's not a lot of expertise in the country about this, whereas I would say we're the predominant experts now in the country. And the plant is there. The equipment is there. The mine is all permitted. This is going ahead, whatever happens.
I understand there's some legacy infrastructure around the Lost Sheep mine. Can you speak to that quickly?
So the reason why we know that this was very successful is because prior to when we took this over, there were a couple of artisanal miners at the Lost Sheep area, and they were basically putting a shovel in the ground and putting the fluorspar straight into a bag and selling the bag unprocessed, which is really pretty unheard of in any ore for any mining project. And look, they had done this for decades. I mean, they were in their 70s and 80s, but they'd put in adits and they'd done shafts and all the sort of things that they could put in over the years to, as a two-man organization that you would put in to pull out ore out of the ground to support the lifestyle of two families, essentially. But it's impressive. Those kind of old artisanal miners but some of the things they did were very impressive. Stuff obviously that M-Shaw would never have signed off on.
No.
And if we were to do, I'd be thrown in jail. But,
is M-Shaw a safety and compliance body in Utah?
Yes. Yeah. So M-Shaw oversees sort of the science and the safety and compliance of most of the mines across the United States. If they were to see what these guys were doing, obviously they would shut them down. But they were artisanal miners. They were essentially doing their own thing and not telling anyone. So
who are these old boys selling to all these years?
So steel companies were just buying it from them. They would sort of take the ore out of the ground, hand cop it a little bit, put it in a bag, and steel companies in Ohio or whatever it was just taking this bag of product and making steel. So
who would Aries potentially sell to then? Obviously steel companies, but who else would the product potentially go to?
So the bigger market within the United States is actually the chemical industry. And I say that because the industry sort of split between a metallurgical product, which is really anything from 60% purity to about 90% purity, and the acid spar grade, which is 97% plus. That's the larger part of the industry. So it's about 2/3. But the acid spar, which is really just means 97% plus purity fluorspar, that goes off to make hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, lithium-ion batteries, aluminum. That is the much larger industry because things like hydrofluoric acid, which actually makes sulfuric acid, is used in almost every chemical process. And so it's a big market. There's a lot of imports just around chemicals that essentially that are derivatives of this fluorspar. But another big industry it's ramping up a lot now is the nuclear industry, and fluorspar is used in the process and the production of UF4 and UF6. And if you want to enrich anything, you have to create uranium hexafluoride, that UF6. Now the nuclear industry is hotting up quite a lot. Fluorspar will be an instrumental part of that supply chain, that domestic supply chain, to build back the national infrastructure around uranium enrichment.
In the United States.
In the United States, yeah.
Yeah, this is where your physicist hat comes into play, eh?
It's where my physicist hat is. So, if I'm talking to Orano or these big nuclear companies, I can stay with them to a certain point at the very least. So.
Yeah, I bet. I understand there's different types of fluorspar. It's a very interesting mineral. It's almost impossible to recycle. And can you tell us more? Do you have the right kind of fluorspar at Lost Sheep?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. It's a mineral. It's kind of fortunate from a producer's point of view that you can't really recover it from its usage. You have to just produce more. So there's a continuous need to mine. So there's obviously that aspect to it.
And why is it so hard? I mean, from what I've read in some of my research, it just seems very difficult to mine. It's a complicated mineral to extract. Why is that? So
it's kind of a tricky one. I think the deposit type can dictate a lot. If you have a big contiguous ore body at surface that you can strip mine, great. We don't have that advantage. We've got very high purity products, very high grades, maybe one of the highest grades in the world, but it's in a non-contiguous pipe, which means you almost need to put in a ramp system around a big clump of pipes. And so it's awkward mining in that sense. But I think the biggest challenge is that when you do lose an industry, it's actually very difficult just to bring that industry back because you lose all the expertise that go along with that. The US did produce a lot of fluorspar in the past. I think Kentucky and Illinois, they had a big fluorspar industry. But when that got destroyed, essentially, and moved overseas, it's not just a matter of building it back up because the experts aren't there, the technology is not there. And look, even when we were designing our plant systems for processing fluorspar, we were talking to manufacturers in Asia about what reagents are needed, what components are needed, how we could actually optimize the flotation period because they were existing producers. And so obviously we'll build back an industry within the United States and begin building back that expertise. But even we were stuck. We were still stuck with the fact that the expertise was not domestically there to source.
Is the government seems quite supportive of you guys. Have you received some non-dilutive capital?
So we did receive non-dilutive capital. So when we approached the federal government and we began talking to them, they said, look, we really want to support you. Initially, when we first reached out to them, there weren't any things like grants in place. And look, at the moment, we are applying for those things now. But they said, look, what we can do is that there are federal incentives here that we can put you in contact with. One would be the US Department of Agriculture sponsors a lot of rural development projects. Mm-hmm. So we'll put you in touch with them. So they put us in touch with them and we got funding, a non-dilutive funding from them that then we used to buy the industrial estate. We used to buy heavy equipment. We used to put foundation work into the ground. All of these big things. And then again, we got connected with the state of Utah's manufacturing bond service, which is about developing domestic industry within the state of Utah. And so we benefited a second time from essentially government funding, this time state, where we received a manufacturing bond that we used to purchase a much larger flotation plant. And that manufactures the product that I mentioned was 2/3 of the whole market. So there has been government support, and most recently there have been RFPs that the Department of Energy has put out to try and look at strengthening the domestic supply chain for certain industries, which Fluorspar is featured in. So we've made a few submissions now to the Department of Energy as well to be part of the domestic supply chain for supporting whatever it is, whether it's hydrofluoric acid production, lithium-ion batteries, or enrichment. All of these different areas where Fluorspar plays a crucial part, we've put in applications for.
So, I mean, it sounds like the social environment towards mining in Utah and generally in the United States towards Fluorspar is quite positive. Would you agree with that?
Oh, hugely. Like it's the good thing about the United States, especially in states like Utah, is that they're very pro-industry, they're very pro-jobs, and if you are involved in those kind of areas, especially domestic industries, you get a lot of support and attention. And I expect that to translate over from not just the support we've received so far, but I expect that eventually to translate to grant money, which would be non-debt, non-dilutive financing too. Are
there any mine life estimations at this point?
So there are mine line estimations. So as I mentioned earlier, when we tried to do a conventional 43-101 report, the difficulty we had is that because of the deposit type, we couldn't interpolate. So what the engineers did was that they looked at the number of pipes that we'd actually located on site. And what they did then was that they looked at the mine life, the average mine life for each one of these deposits. And so what they did was they added that all up and they halved it and halved it again. And that took them to over 15 years of mine life. Whereas doing it, it's not a conventional way of doing it, but like you work with what you've got, and we've got a very high grade deposit. You can't put a 43-1 on it. That's fine, but the economics are very healthy. The margins are very healthy, and even if you look at a quarter of the entire identified number of pipes, you still arrive at like well over a decade of like good production.
So at the beginning, we talked about, fluorspar being relatively unknown. Industrial minerals aren't often viewed as the most sexy. How are you going to get the market interested in fluorspar, over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I think the market likes production. And at the moment in the junior mining space, the market is very cold on it. And it's a very difficult time to be a junior miner. And so there's not a huge amount of market movement, projects getting funded. A lot of companies are struggling. But when you move out of that space into manufacturing, you're treated as a very different thing. Then you're an industrial manufacturing company. And that's ultimately what we'll transition into. Then you attract a whole different raft of investors and shareholder interest because you have de-risked it essentially. And look, to be fair to a lot of investors, I think there's inflation, there's a rise of cost of living, and people are squeezed. And when that happens, you do get a shrinkage of investment of free capital that's available for more risky endeavors like junior mining. We're about to transition out of that. As soon as you transition out of that, it's treated very differently, and it will attract a whole new different type of investor base.
What is the company's market cap right now, and how much do you guys have in the treasury?
It's sitting around about $30 million at the moment.
Okay.
And there's money that's been earmarked for construction of facilities and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, that government money can't be used for things like mining costs and ramp installations, mining equipment, that kind of stuff, because it's given to us for the purpose of manufacturing. Mm-hmm. Even though, ironically, you have no manufacturing without the mining side of things. So there's capital for that, but we'll need to raise the additional mining-related capital.
Looking out 6 to 12 months, what would make Ares Strategic Mining a success in your eyes? Where do you hope the company to be? What would make it a success to you?
That's an easy question to answer. I want to see production. I want to see revenues. I want to see things being shipped. I want to see profits. If 6 to 12 months, if there's no reason, if we can't get the cash, we shouldn't be comfortably there. And then and then once we're in that position, we can start looking at secondary and tertiary mine sites at the Spore Mountain area. Great. And we can try and increase those revenues. That's where I want to be. I want to be out of this development stage. I want to be into a different business with new problems.
Yeah. You want to get off the 1 yard line and into the end zone.
100%. Like, I want to be there. I wanted to be there months ago.
Yeah. James, thanks for your time today. Thanks for sharing your entrepreneurial wisdom and giving us some things to think about, some life advice. We wish you guys all the luck at Ares Strategic Mining.
Okay. No, thanks a lot, Alex. Thanks for having me on.